Welcome to Psychology at Work. I'm Dr. Paul Brewerton, otherwise known as the Strengths Guy. As a Doctor of Psychology and the founder and chair of Strengthscope, I'm here to share my insights with you. Tune in for a regular dose of positive, strengths-based content. My podcasts are packed full of tips and tools designed to enhance your world of work. Ready to dive into the good stuff in this episode? Then let's go. Today I've got some really exciting news to share. We, that is the Strengthscope we, have recently released our latest research report, which is called Team Effectiveness in the Workplace 2025. And it has a lot of really interesting and exciting, useful information in it. It is a 60-pager, folks. So please get in touch with the team if you'd like a copy. But if you need a bit more information before you make that decision, let me help. Over the next couple of episodes, I'm going to be taking you through some of the highlights from the report, the key findings, the so whats, and the what nexts. First thing to say is that although I've said the report relates to team effectiveness in the workplace, which it very much does, I should also let you know that the report is based on data from just under 1,600 team members collected using Strengthscope Team, but also just under 1,300 leaders collected using Strengthscope Leader. So today I want to take you through some of the key leadership findings from our research. Next time I'll move on to talking about teams. So what I'm going to include is what energizes leaders the most and least in 2025, what about differences by industry and by job function, how this has changed over time, what leaders do best and worst in terms of leadership skills, the perception gap between leaders and followers, the most significant factors in predicting leadership effectiveness, and then I want to finish off with a summary and practical next steps. So to start with, what energizes leaders the most and least? So our research shows that the highest ranking strengths for leaders, this is based on our 24 strength model, are from the top: leading, enjoying, influencing and leading others towards a goal; then decisiveness, being energized by making quick, clear, confident decisions; critical thinking, so getting energy from breaking down and systematically evaluating problems and arguments; then efficiency, taking a methodical, planful approach to achieving tasks; emotional control, that's drawing energy from ensuring that emotions are directed towards remaining calm and productive; and finally, well, I say finally, top six finally, resilience, that's being energized by tough challenges and setbacks. So that's the top of the distribution. The bottom of the distribution shows that leaders gain the least amount of energy from optimism, that's believing that the future is bright and staying upbeat about it; self-confidence, that's backing yourself or being energized by believing in your capacity to get the job done; and self-improvement, being energized by learning and self-development. Now, this does vary by job function and industry sector, and there is lots more on that in the report. For example, I love that efficiency, emotional control and critical thinking are most energizing to leaders in construction, while in health and social work, leaders are most energized by compassion, leading and collaboration. And across job functions, there are differences as well. So while sales leaders report being most energized by relationship building, by persuasiveness and leading, leaders of finance functions report being most energized by efficiency, critical thinking, and resilience. There's so much more in this. You can imagine with the complexity of job functions and industries, there's a lot of detail, so you need the full report to see the full picture. Moving on to whether leadership strengths have changed over time. This is a question we're often asked. What about pre-pandemic versus now? What's changed? What's shifted? So we looked at that. Comparative data from pre-pandemic from 2019, that includes just over 1,000 leaders, which were matched in terms of demographic characteristics to our 2024 sample. Excuse me. And this dual period analysis allowed us to identify trends and changes in leadership strengths over time. Now, it's no surprise that given the test-retest reliability, the stable nature of strengths in Strengthscope, the top three and the lowest three strengths haven't changed since the pandemic. But in the middle of that distribution, efficiency common sense and compassion rank significantly higher now compared to pre-pandemic levels. So leaders today, therefore, are more likely to gain energy from planning, from making decisions based on past success, and caring for others' well-being rather than in pre-pandemic times. So moving on to what do leaders do best and worst in terms of their skills. We've talked about strengths, but Strengthscope Leader looks also at 16 effective leadership behaviours across 4 clusters. The 4 clusters are sharing vision, setting a clear shared vision for success, sparking engagement, empowering, inspiring, developing people, skillfully executing, setting goals, coaching, giving feedback to make sure tasks are completed, and finally, sustaining progress. That's continuous improvement and innovation through learning and experimentation. Now, in our assessment, we ask leaders to rate themselves on these 16 behaviours, and then they collect feedback from their nominated stakeholders. And what we found is that both leaders and their raters score leaders highest on sparking engagement, then sustaining progress, then sharing vision, and finally skillful execution. What that means is that leaders and raters, their followers, typically see empowering and inspiring people as leaders' most effective skill, followed by delivering continuous improvement, then setting a clear vision for success, and finally delivering clear messages and feedback on performance. And just like with their strengths, leaders underestimate how effective they are in all areas of leadership skill. So let's move on to talk about that, the perception gap. And I've got to say, it's a sad thing, and it is therefore with heavy heart that our research shows that the average perception gap between leaders and their followers has grown by 75% since 2019. The gap has increased yearly since the pandemic, and it's a combination of raters improving their ratings of leaders and to a lesser extent, leaders reducing their self-ratings. So leaders believe they're slightly less effective than pre-pandemic, particularly in skillful execution, and their stakeholders believe leaders are significantly more effective than they were pre-pandemic, and that's in all areas. So what I mean by that being a bit sad and, an unfortunate finding in a way is that leaders are underrating themselves and not appreciating what they're delivering at least as much as their followers are. So let's get into some more detail here. The most notable increases from raters focus on sparking engagement and sustaining progress. That's pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. So promoting an open and respectful work environment, recognizing and celebrating effort and achievement fairly. Those things have been a real focus for leaders over the past few years. We've heard about them a lot. And according to their followers, to stakeholders, this is being successfully delivered. Much of that relates to building and maintaining psychological safety within teams. The most notable decreases from leaders are about pushing teams to excel, as well as including and involving people, particularly regarding improving accountability and dealing with poor performance, simplifying how they communicate their vision to stakeholders, and keeping people focused on the long game. They may relate to some leaders believing that this is more difficult to achieve post-pandemic due to the growth of the hybrid workplace. The most significant leadership factors driving effectiveness. Now, to prioritize the most important leadership behaviors, it's worth examining the strongest relationships between leader behaviors and overall leader effectiveness as judged by their raters. So raters rate their leaders' effectiveness from 1 to 10. So if we do this, we can see that 4 of the 5 standout predictors of leadership effectiveness come from the area of sharing vision. And there's also 1 from the area of sustaining progress. So they include, in descending order, setting strategic goals based on a good understanding of the organization's changing environment, inspiring others with a simple, energizing, realistic vision of success, then ensuring a strong customer or service-based strategy that builds trust and loyalty, encouraging people to be open to change and develop their capabilities to meet future needs, and then finally, keeping people and stakeholders focused on the bigger picture and longer term priorities. Now, it's relevant that 4 of the 5 leader skills that are most closely linked with judgments of leadership effectiveness fall into that area of sharing vision. Partly because that's an area that is being judged as less effective across the whole leadership group. So our advice to leaders is to spend time building a compelling strategy, and most importantly, communicating that in a straightforward and inspiring way to stakeholders. It is often only the leader who is in a position to do that, to provide that connection to the future, to keep people focused on the bigger goal, and to ensure that they stay agile to meet the needs of future requirements, and to understand the needs of customers or the service provided to stakeholders. As a leader, focusing on creating and sharing your vision creates that bedrock to spark engagement, to enable progress, and to create that sustainable team or organization over time. So our advice is to start there. Now, to summarize, and I know that's been a lot, so leaders have had to deal with a lot of changes over the past 5 years, often with limited support and little opportunity to hone their skills in managing people. That just hasn't been the focus so much in the past few years since the pandemic. Now, if leaders are not aware of their innate strengths, they may not be aware of the impact of those strengths either. And that's critical to drive productive and effective teams. We know that the impact of hybrid and remote working since the pandemic, along with all its benefits, can negatively impact the communication between managers and team members if changes aren't handled well. Leaders need to be less self-critical. It is time for leaders to recognize their strengths and their skills and continue to build on these strong foundations that they have laid post-pandemic. Their stakeholders are noticing leaders' hard work, and leaders can afford to be a little bit less tough on themselves, while of course recognizing that there is always further work they can do. When HR and L&D teams are looking into skill building for leaders, they often look at gaps in knowledge as well as weaknesses and try to close those gaps. Now, that can be a useful approach at times, but there's also immense value in understanding and maximizing the strengths of your leaders. By understanding what energizes them and what they're good at, HR and L&D teams can utilize those strengths more effectively and deliver better business outcomes. And to support their development journey, a clear next step for leaders is to collect regular feedback from their colleagues based on how effectively they are using their strengths and skills to address the risk areas and to build on the positives. Now, when it comes to leadership skills, their followers say that leaders are most effective at sparking engagement, that is, empowering and inspiring people, followed by delivering continuous improvement, setting a clear vision for success, and finally delivering clear messages and feedback on performance. That shows a very clear roadmap for what leaders need to focus on to improve their impact. If we think about giving clear messages, feedback on performance, and that being the lowest in the pile, that's a really important point for teams. I'll come on to that in the next episode. Teams need clarity. Individual team members need to understand what's being required of them and asked of them and how they're doing against their KPIs. And that's an area that leaders are being rated as lower by their stakeholders and their followers. Also, remember that the top predictors of leadership effectiveness mostly relate to sharing vision, and leaders aren't the greatest at this. So our advice, as I mentioned earlier, to leaders, all leaders, is to spend time building a compelling strategy and vision, and most importantly, communicating that in a straightforward and inspiring way. That's it. I hope you found this useful research update and a summary of, I was going to say about half of what's in the research report that we've produced. It's probably less than half, but some of the highlights there from the leadership side. As I say, if you're interested to receive a copy of the full report, please do get in touch and we'll be really happy to provide that. Till next time, stay strong.